Every grain has a story to tell, and it's up to you to tell it. Welcome back to the shop. Today, I'm going to show you 4 different projects that you can build easily with just a few different materials and some of the basic tools. And these are projects that are fairly simple to build. You can probably sell them for a fair amount of money if that's what you're looking to do, or give them away as gifts. Now, we're going to use about 4 materials, maybe 5 for these projects. Okay, the first one we're going to use is some walnut. This is 1 inch thick. The piece was about 6 feet long. That's what I've used to make these projects. The next material is some hard maple. This piece was about a 4 foot long piece, about 3/4 of an inch thick. So we're going to use the maple and the walnut for a lot of them. The next one we're going to use is some cherry. This is some rough cherry that I've got, but I've milled a piece of it down in order to make one of these projects. Now, the next part that we're going to throw in to kind of make a little bit of a twist to one of these projects is a piece of aluminum rod. This is 1/2 inch aluminum rod. I bought this for about $10 at a hardware store. So make sure you stick around to check this project out and how it works. All right, so project number 1 that I've got for you is this really unique walnut and maple cell phone holder. Now, this is not just a cell phone holder, but it's also got these arms that are coming out the side here. These arms are intended to either hold watches, bracelets, rings, depending on how big your finger is. Entirely up to you. The intention of this is to set it down maybe on a nightstand or a dresser or something like that. So that way when you go to sleep at night, you can run your cord through this hole here and you can set your phone on here to charge it, and you can hang up all of your other stuff. Now this is made from some of that walnut. So this is a 1 inch thick piece of walnut that's 12 inches long. And then I've got this phone part holder here that's also the 1 inch walnut, and I've got a rounded router edge on it, and this goes for about 10 inches long. Now, when you look at this, you'll see that the holder for the actual phone itself is a little bit higher up, and that's because I've got a hole drilled here in order for a charge cord to go through and to be able to bend up and to plug into the unit itself. Now, just to show you a little bit more, the way that this works is very simple. Take your charge cord, and we're going to feed it through that hole. So now we've got it coming out the front. Then we're going to plug it into our phone. And then once we've got it plugged into our phone, that's it. And that's how it's going to hold there. The one tricky part with this holder, it is on an angle. The phone has to rest on an angle. And so what you'll see on the back side here is that I inset this about 1 inch. This is leaning back at 75 degrees because it's 90 degrees, which is straight up and down, less 15. In order to secure this together, so this is nothing but glue. There's no nails, no screws, no nothing in this. But what I did down here in order to secure this joint together is I've got 2 dowel pins going through. So the dowel pins are about 5/8 of an inch into this lower piece of walnut, and then the balance of the height goes up into this piece here. Because I had this amazing doweling jig here, what I was able to do is essentially get this piece on a 15-degree angle and rest it up against it, kind of like that on an angle, and I had to hold it in place while I drilled the 2 holes for the dowel pins. But it actually worked pretty good. Now, the other thing that I did for the maple piece on the back is this is 1 piece of maple that's 10 inches long. And because the width of this is 4 inches, okay, because of that, and this being 10 inches long, I've got 3 inches on either side. And I took this over to my table saw, and just using a regular blade, not a dado blade, what I did is I trimmed this out. Now, this is about 3/4 of an inch thick, so I cut out, or dadoed it out, I should say, 5/8 of an inch at 4 inches wide. And I did it so it was a nice, snug fit. And then I just put a little bit of glue in the backside and a tiny bit of glue here and here. And then I was able to just slide this on with hand pressure and then clamped it in place just using some spring clamps. So it was pretty simple. For these ones here, These are just glued on to the face of the walnut itself, and then some spring clamps to hold them on. An alternative for this is that you can also put a couple dabs of CA glue in there if you really wanted to. Once that was all said and done, actually, I should say before I did these things, I took and I did these rounded edges over on my writer table. So not something that you have to do. I chose to do rounded edges on this, but you can do a 45-degree chamfered edge as well if you wanted to. As far as drilling the hole here, this is just a 5/8 of an inch hole in order for the cord to go through, which I used my Forstner bits for. So the first one was the miter saw to cut these to length. Everything cut to length on the miter saw. For the piece of maple, as well as for the dado that's done on the back and making sure everything was a proper width, I used a table saw for that. I had some clamps to hold all of this together, and then of course this jig here. Now I couldn't find anything online that was exactly like this, but what I did find was a unit like this that's, you know, it's not identical to this, and this is certainly more detailed than this one is, but it was listed on the site for about $47 US, give or take. With this one here being walnut and maple, I'd probably look at selling something like this for maybe around $60, maybe $70. I mean, it is 1-inch thick walnut. Definitely a worthwhile project that you can make some money on. All right, project number 2 is one that you've probably seen before, and that is a triangle. I'm just kidding. If you've seen these online before, you may know what their intended purpose is. When you turn it this way here, if you've got anybody who likes books, well, they've got pages in those books, and sometimes they're not going to read it all, so they want to set it down, not lose their page. Now you can use a bookmark, or you can go like this, and you can set it right on top of this unit. That way, you can just take it and pick it up right where you left off. Now, let's look at this a little bit further. So, this is an equal side triangle. And in a triangle, you've got a total of 180 degrees. So with that, when we're making a triangle like this, we divide that by 3, and that tells us that we've got to be 60 degrees at every corner. Now, when we're joining pieces together, what we essentially need to do is split that angle, that point, in half. So that means in order to make the 60-degree angle at each point, we're going to cut each piece at 30 degrees. Okay? So this is actually a pretty simple one. So first of all, these pieces here, or the dimensions of this, I should say, are 8 inches by 8 inches by 8 inches. Now, when a lot of people make these, what they'll do is they'll have 3 pieces that are at the exact same length on either side. Now, I didn't do that. The reason is because I wanted to have a flat bottom all the way across the bottom on this. So what that meant is I cut the bottom at 8 inches. I cut the one side at 8 inches. And then this piece here actually fits in between these two. So what that means is the length of this piece is going to be 8 inches less the thickness of this and less the thickness of this. Now this material here, this cherry, is 5/8 of an inch thick. So when I did the length on this part here, it was the 8 inches less 5/8 and less 5/8. So I believe that comes out to 1 1/4 inches. Don't quote me on that. I'm doing the math off the top of my head. Now, there's a lot of these things that do exist, and so I wanted to make this one a little bit different. And so there's a couple of things that I did. Number one, I put, again, a piece of cherry as a shelf here that goes all the way through to the back side. Purpose of this is if somebody wears glasses, they can slide their glasses in here. So I wanted to make sure this was going to be wide enough for most glasses anyways. Now, this is a 2 3/4 inch width, and this is 2 3/4, and this is 2 3/4. So it's exactly the same. And so once the triangle portion of this was dry, this shelf was actually pretty easy because these joints were already solid. I put some glue on these joints. Of course, these joints are cut at 30-degree angles and a 30-degree angle here as well. Put some glue on it, slid it in, and then just use some quick clamp pressure to hold it in place. So that was really, really simple. Now, the other unique thing that I wanted to do about this was I had this whole bottom section that was open. And so what I decided to do was to make a drawer that simply slides inside just like this. Now this is where these materials, I kind of varied it a little bit. So the little knob on here I did with a square piece of cherry that I had left. But because this is not overly long, it's only 8 inches, I didn't want the drawer taking up a ton of space. I wanted more space inside the drawer itself. So what I decided to do is I used some 1/8 plywood for the front of the drawer, and I used 1/8 plywood on the bottom. And then I just glued all of this together. Now, clamping something like this is incredibly difficult. So the way that I did it is I put glue in every single one of these joints, and then I added a few dabs of CA glue and gave it some activator spray also in order to hold it in place. I also took a piece of cherry and I put it underneath here, underneath this top shelf, with a 1/8 of an inch spacing from the front. The reason I did that was to allow that to slide in and essentially be completely flush. The other thing that I did to make sure that this slides really well is I took the bottom of this drawer and I used a bunch of paste wax on it and let that paste wax really set in, so that way I could use it to get it sliding nice and easy, and it works incredibly well. So build time on this project probably took me about an hour and a half with the dry time. And I simply finished this with an oil finish. As far as the tools I use, so I use a table saw to do every single one of the angled cuts, and even the ripping down of the 1/8 plywood and all the other small pieces. For the most part, the table saw was the only thing that I used for this. I did use the miter saw to cut it to length at 8 inches. That was it. Now, because I did have to mill this down, I did have to run this through a planer on a flattening jig, because it's about 3/4 to 7/8 of an inch thick, and I had to rip it down to get it flat in order to make sure that it would work properly. If you look at some of these boards that I have, you can see there's a lot of cupping. So by the time these boards are plain flat, they're usually about 5/8 of an inch thick. So cost to build something like this is likely going to be in and around $10 by the time you buy all the materials and you get the glue and everything. So the cost is not going to be incredibly high. If you go and look on Etsy and some other sites, there are some of these units, and I found one that's similar, minus the drawer, that was selling for, or I listed it for, I should say, around 50, $53. This one having a shelf in the middle, but also having a drawer, you could probably retail something like this for around 70, $75. I mean, it's pretty heavy. It's pretty solid, and it really is a nice piece. All right, so this next project is following a very similar theme to some of the other ones that I did, but this one has a really unique element to it. And so here we are. This is a phone holder slash pen holder or holder for all kinds of different things. I mean, you could put all kinds of different stuff in here. It's entirely up to you. The one unique part about this is, in addition to using the walnut and this maple, I also used some 1/2 inch aluminum rod. This aluminum rod is actually a 7-foot long piece that I got at the hardware store for about $9. So I decided to use it this time and to build another project. And the nice part about aluminum is if you have the right blade, you can just cut it on your miter saw. Now, this project is a very simple one to make and a very easy one to make if you have the right tools. Okay. First of all, this little phone holder here is dadoed in at a 15-degree angle. So to show you what I mean about the angle, we're going to take a phone and we're going to set it in here. And as you can see, it holds that phone in place. The phone doesn't even touch this part, nor does it come over top of these holes. So you can still have all the stuff standing in the back here. But you could also take a phone and you could put it sideways if you wanted to. You could put a tablet in there, all kinds of different stuff. Now, in order to dado this out, what I did is using my table saw, and the table saw is one of the main tools for this project. One of, not the only, but one of. I put the table saw on a 15-degree angle, all right, or 75 degrees, depending on how you're measuring it. And I raised it to the depth that I wanted it to be in this case, because this is, once again, the 1-inch thick walnut. I cut a depth into this of a 1/2 inch, and I just used my 50-tooth combination blade to trim into it. once I had that height set. So this is a 1/2 inch inset dado into this. Now, the challenge with a lot of the combination blades is they don't have a flat tooth. What they have is an angled tooth. Now, I don't remember the exact name of the tooth. I believe it's an ATF. Don't quote me on that. The challenge with that tooth is it leaves ridges in here, and the ridges aren't going to always look very good. So after I dadoed this thing out, I then took a chisel, and it's a very sharp Narex chisel that I use, and I just ran it along like that in order to trim some of the grooves out. So if you look from the side, it looks flat. If you look from the top, you can see ridges. But I'm actually okay with that, because if you put thinner stuff in here, like cardstock, the thin ridges will actually probably hold it in place. So to me, that was perfect. Very similar to that other phone holder. This is a 12-inch long piece, and I believe the width on this, the width on this one's about 4.5 inches. So it's not incredibly wide this way. It's only 12 inches long this way. For the piece I've got on top, this is a piece of maple. This is, I believe, 7/8 of an inch thick. Yeah, so it's 7/8. It's 12 inches long, and the width sits at 2 3/8 of an inch. And then marked in the center, I had drawn a line here, and using my 1/2 inch Forstner bit, I drilled 5 holes here. This one being dead in the center, and then spacing the other ones out. These were about 1.5 inch spacing, but the spacing is entirely up to you. Depends on what you're going to use it for. Now, on the bottom side of this, I did the exact same thing for the aluminum rod. So I cut the aluminum rod at 3 inches long. It goes into the piece of walnut and the piece of maple by a 1/2 inch on either end. And it's a really snug fit, which is really, really good. So I've got this drilled out with the Forstner bit, this drilled out with the Forstner bit. And then the other thing I did when I put these in here, I mean, I could have clamped these things together to squeeze them tight, and I wouldn't even have to add any glue. And it would hold just fine because of the amount of pressure. But I did some looking into it just to be on the safe side. When it comes to wood glues, I primarily use a Gorilla Wood glue. And the Gorilla Wood glue is a polyurethane-based glue. And so I did some research on that, and as it turns out, the Gorilla or polyurethane glue will actually adhere fairly well to aluminum. So what I did, very similar to what you would do if you were putting dowels, is I drilled these things out. I put some glue in the bottom and a little bit on the sides, and then I tapped it into the one side, and then put it down like this, a nice soft, another piece of wood on top, and then I hammered it down in there until I was the exact same height in between here. My height in between is 2 inches in total. And really, it's perfect. So you can use it for all kinds of different stuff. And I'll show you an example. So if you want to put pencils in it, you can put a pencil in and it's going to hold it like that. If you wanted to get fancy with Pica pencils, you could do that as well. I did make sure that it fit those ones. Now, you can go a little further than that if you want. I have one of these little micro oiling pens. This thing's amazing. If you don't have one, look it up, because you'll never regret getting it for your tools. And it actually holds one of those things nice and straight as well. Now, let's go over the tools for this one. Very simple. I've mentioned some of them already. Table saw for doing the dado cut, set at 75 degrees, 15 degrees off of 90. Okay. Miter saw to cut this to length. This here, same as a table saw and a miter saw to cut this thing to length. For the aluminum rod, I just used a fine-tooth carbide blade to cut this on my miter saw, and it works fairly well, although make sure you're wearing your PPE, your safety glasses and whatnot, because you are going to get some aluminum shards come off of it. And then for these here, I use my drill press and a 1/2 inch Forstner bit, but you can do that with a drill and a regular drill bit. It doesn't have to be a Forstner bit either. Let's talk about pricing for something like this. So I looked this one up. This is an idea I thought of. I just saw some other ideas. They were all made out of wood. And so I decided to go this route. I couldn't find one exactly like this online. So that may be a key selling point for you if you've got anybody that likes the maple walnut contrast, but also some metal thrown in there too. I found one very similar to this, all made out of wood, no metal, and I believe it was listed for around $47-48. This one here, personally, with the maple and the walnut and the aluminum in here, I think you could probably retail this one for a bit higher, maybe $60, if you wanted to. I mean, it's a good size. The one that I found was not even as big as this one. So maybe 70, maybe $80, but you can make a huge amount of money on this. This thing, I would say, is definitely worth it. All right, the next project that I've got for you is a really, really simple one. We've all seen lots of them, and that is a box. And this is actually a 2-in-1. Okay. Remember I said at the beginning of the video that I got 4 +1 projects. So the +1 projects is a little bit of bonus about what's going to go inside of this, but I will show you that in a minute. So make sure you stay tuned for it. This is a box that is made out of all hard maple. So this is where these pieces of hard maple really came into play. Okay. This box is not overly large. It's 4.5 inches by 9.5 inches. Okay. The height on this box here is 2 3/4, and we're dealing with material that's about 3/4 of an inch thick. Now, to give this a little bit of added character, I put a little piece of walnut on top at 4 inches long that can be used as the handle, and it's simply glued on there to just hold it, open it up, and drop it down. There's no fancy hinges or anything like that on this box because kind of what's going to be going in this box doesn't really need that. So let me show you just a little bit about this box. So this box here, again, made out of hard maple. The lid has got 45-degree chamfers going all the way around just to give it that little bit of an extra look when it's closed. On the underside, I had some scrap pieces of maple that were left over from when I had to rip this project down. And so I used those to essentially match the inside measurements of this box. And the inside measurements of this box are 3 inches by 8 inches. So that is the outer diameter of these pieces here. So that way the box just goes in and sits nicely just like that. All the corners on this are cut on a 45-degree angle. I thought about using the miter lock bit for this. And if you haven't seen that video, I'll put a video link up here somewhere on the corners to when I used a miter lock to build a table. It was my first time using it. I haven't used it again since, because even though I've used it once and I'm more comfortable with it, it's still really nerve-wracking. As far as the bottom for this, I used a piece of 1/8 plywood. Now, because the width of a regular saw blade is 1/8 of an inch, it made it very easy to use it here. So what I did is I set the depth of the saw blade that I was using to cut out a channel for this piece of plywood here. And all I did is ran each one of these pieces individually over top of that saw blade. Now, I believe the depth for this one, I went to 3/8 of an inch because it's 3/4 inches thick. 3/8 of an inch is half of that. So I went that far in. That's not how big the piece of plywood is because I like to leave a little bit of space in there to move it around. Now, the other thing I did is I did glue this piece of plywood into place rather than let it float in there. So that way there was less of a hollow sound if it got tapped on or whatnot. I cut out all of those channels. And as soon as I cut out the channels, I fit it to this piece here to make sure that it would fit, in which case it did. And so this is 3 inches wide. So what I did is 3.5 inches in width for this. I put an extra 1/2 inch on either side to allow a 1/4 inch of it to go into the groove. I had everything cut on a 45-degree angle already, and I used the miter saw for that. Then I clamped all of this together. Now, the clamp that I used to hold it together is one of these. And no, these are not the best clamps in the world. But if you have something that you need to clamp on a 45-degree angle, something like this works, because as you take this out, these pieces all separate individually, and you can put one of them on each corner. So it makes it really handy. But if you don't have a clamp like that, maybe you have some other corner clamps. So it could be some clamps that look like this. These are very, very old Bessie corner clamps. So something like this might work as well. I didn't use it. I used the strap, but this could also work. Or you can make your own corner clamping jig. And if you're not sure how to do that, I'm going to link a video up here that I did make a while ago on a corner clamping jig. So you should go and check that out too. Finished with an oil finish, and the top just drops right in there. And it's just a really nice, really simple project overall. As far as the tools that I used for this, I had a miter saw and a table saw, and for the most part, those are the only tools I used for this project. So you can switch them up for hand tools if you want. That's entirely up to you. You can use different materials. You can put some splines in here by putting this on an angle on a jig over top of your table saw and just running it over a saw blade like that. Now I do have a video showing you that jig as well. So I'm going to link that video also so you can go and check that one out because it's a really, really handy jig to have. All right, now let's talk about cost for something like this. So if you go surf around the internet, Etsy, all kinds of different places, there are boxes like this everywhere. There's none that are exactly like this. Always, when you do a project, put your own spin on it. Make it yours, right? That's what I tried to do with this a little bit. I found one that is very similar. It was using a curly maple as opposed to the hard straight grain maple that I've got here. And I found that listed for around $100. Now, I believe it's a little bit bigger than this one. But for retail on something like this, done up all nice, and even more so if you did splines or any of those fancy cuts or whatnot in it, or put some hinges on it, so that way it hinges open. You could probably sell something like this for maybe 60 bucks, maybe 70 bucks, maybe a little bit less than that. It's going to go for a little bit more if it's a little bit bigger in size. You can definitely make a good amount. All right, now you remember at the beginning how I said that it's a 4+1, right? So I kind of got a bonus project. And that bonus project goes with one of these other ones. And that is this maple box. And it's got a little bit of a surprise project inside. This project may not be for everybody, but it is a super cool one. Okay, and I'm going to show it to you. It's inside here. You ready for this? It is these. Now, it's around wintertime right now. What comes up in winter? Well, we got the holiday season. We got Christmas coming up. And this is a Christmas decoration, an ornament for a tree. Or you can hang it elsewhere. This I made on a laser engraver. So if you don't have a laser engraver, that's not the end of the world, because you could still make ornaments like this. If you have a smaller, really thin blade scroll saw, you could still do some of these cuts. But if you do have a laser engraver, this is an amazing one to do. This is just 1/8 plywood, and looking at the side of it here, it's 3 layers of that plywood that have been glued together. The back layer has a snowflake cut out. The middle layer has some more snowflakes that are a little bit bigger. And then the front layer has a reindeer or deer, whatever. And also has a name engraved on it. This one happens to have my name engraved on it because, you know, we're going to hang this on our tree. So this is just kind of a really cool, unique one. Again, I said the purpose for this box is because I've got a whole bunch of these and they're actually going to sit inside this box. They're a super cool thing to do. And if you go on to Etsy or to many different types of download sites, you can download stuff like this for free, or you can go to Etsy and you can get templates with hundreds of these things for only a few bucks. If you don't have a laser but you have a CNC, you can do the exact same thing on a CNC machine with some 1/8 plywood. When you have the ability to take a project like this and customize it for somebody, it's worth that much more. You may have families that for the holidays would love to have decorations like this to be able to give out to family members. Maybe it's with all of their names engraved on it. And a lot of people like to give out ornaments for the holidays that have the year on it, just to mark that year celebration in the calendar. Thanks so much for watching today's video. Make sure to let me know down in the comments what you think about these projects. I think they're pretty cool. And what I want to know is, can you think of any spin that you could put on building these projects that gives a slight variation from these ones? And remember to hit that like button, share this video with other people so that way they may get some project ideas. Maybe subscribe to the channel. That's entirely up to you. And if you do already, thank you very much. Helps out the channel quite a bit. Until next time, happy cutting.